Hi, welcome back. Well, today we have Naomi Reed in the studio. She's a physio, which is good because my back's been giving me
so is mine.
a few issues. No, but seriously, you do have a physio background, but you've ended up being a bit of an author and a storyteller. Interesting journey, how that happened?
Yeah, it was never the plan. I mean, you never plan anything, really, do you? But it actually happened because I was desperate.
Yeah.
And so part of my story is that my husband and I, we spent 6 years in Nepal working with the Christian medical mission, INF.
In Kathmandu or elsewhere?
Pokhara, yeah. And so 6 years, and we were working in a leprosy hospital and a general hospital, and then training local physios.
Mm-hmm.
But then we came back, we went back with our 3 sons. Mm-hmm. And so the point that I became quite desperate, I mean, a lot, like, I don't want to sound negative, it was actually such a privilege to be there. We made the best friends and we just learnt so much. But
you've written some books about those experiences too, haven't you?
And that's the point, yeah. That's why I became desperate at the beginning of our 7th monsoon. And when it's your first, you think, oh, wow, you know, there's this novelty.
This is very exotic.
Yeah, 120 days of rain. But by the time it was our 7th, you know, I knew what was coming. And by then we were living in Dhulikhel. So Darren was out every day training Nepali physios at the Institute. And that was all very good. But I was at home homeschooling our 3 sons, who were then 4, 6 and 10. So if you've got sons, you've got sons. You can imagine, you know, 3 of them inside in 120 days of rain. And, you know, we're on a ridge in the Himalayas. We didn't have shops or soccer clubs.
Not a whole lot of extracurricular activities.
Pools. No, none at all. We walked to the top of our hill, and then sometimes we would walk back down again. You know, that's what we did. So then, anyway, the monsoon was coming, but as well as that, those particular years, it was the civil war in Nepal. So we had an army camp just at the bottom of our hill, and we heard bombs and gunfire every week. So
this is Maoist guerrillas versus the government.
The insurgency, the government, and then the king. And it just got worse. 10,000 people had died. It was just at this point where everyone thought it was hopeless politically, you know. And so I was going into the monsoon thinking, rain, war, homeschool, grief, I can't do this. You know, it's too hard.
All too
much.
And
knowing what it was going to be like. So I think just in that desperation, that was the point. I'd never written anything before. I was physio, science-based. I just got out the laptop, and every second night, about midnight, I would just type, and I just had to think and pray and somehow express myself somehow.
So this is autobiography as therapy, isn't it?
Kind of,
really?
Well, yeah, sort of, except, I mean, people say that, but it was a little bit obviously more crafted and deliberate than that. But it was such a helpful process for me to look back on other seasons of life and to consider, even Ecclesiastes 3, you know, what does that mean? That there's a time for everything and a season for every activity under heaven. What about war and pain and suffering? And it was just very difficult, but at the same time really helpful for me to look back, to see somehow amidst all of that God is still, he's still sovereign.
So out of that mission experience came, how many books?
Well, yes, quite a few. The first one was my 7th monsoon. So by the end of 120 days, I'd written suddenly 65,000 words. There they were. That was published, and then that led on to the other books.
And it did quite well, and there was a series of books, and even one for when you returned, that sort of cultural, reverse culture shock when you got back.
Which is even harder.
But you've even moved from storytelling on the page to actually doing more like stage productions and stuff as well.
We never know what's coming next, do we?
Yeah,
we really never know. So then, the book was published, and I started to see the power of stories. So people would just stop me at speaking engagements or in the shops, or they'd email me and say, thank you for sharing your story.
Well, what was it about your stories you think that
just sharing pain. Like I also shared about a period prior to Nepal where we'd lived through 5 miscarriages and struggled with pain and other types of grief. And but being honest with that, but not just blurting it out, because anyone can do that, but blurting it out in such a way that you find that hope in the middle of it, that you find that hope in God and what he's done for us through Jesus that allows us to keep walking. And so when people connect with those stories, they think, okay, good, because they haven't lived through that.
It gives them hope.
That's right. It's something similar. And they think, well, I can put my hope in that same God that Naomi does, and we can walk along together, which is what is a human shared journey, isn't it? And when we hear each other's stories, go, yeah.
And so when, because you're now doing sort of one-woman monologues and stage productions for kids and all this sort of stuff, are some of those same themes coming
Yes.
out through that hope through, you know, despair and things like that?
Absolutely. So it was Christmas, and I started thinking about how can we not isolate the nativity story? How can we tell it in context and in a fresh way? So I told a Bible story through what I imagined through the voice of Mary, the mother, but not the young, you know, the one in blue by the manger. But say you imagined a 70-year-old Mary. You know, what would she say looking back? If someone asked her story, how would she tell the whole thing? Because she wouldn't just go, donkey, baby, shepherds, would she? She'd go, you know, the whole context of his life.
The scripture tells us Mary treasured these things in her heart.
Absolutely.
So I imagine as an older lady, she would have...
Still be treasuring and tell the whole story. What did it mean? And his life and the way he was and his death and resurrection and how that impacted the entire Roman world. You know, she would have... So I began with her and I wrote it and I put it on our church Christmas Eve. And afterwards, there's this old man who's just crying, saying, I've never cried before in church.
Wow.
And it just showed me, if you take the story and just go from left of the action a bit, tell it the same, but tell it with skin on, tell it with, so they can smell those sheep and hear the sounds of the Roman soldiers and feel the swaddling cloths and the grave clothes together. You know, then it impacts us. So that's what I did. And it led on to all sorts of things. For example, friends of ours at church who collect biblical coins. And so they have an actual denarius that, you know, the one 12, you know, struck in 12 AD. Not the one, but maybe it was the one.
Is this an actual denarius or is this a reproduction?
No, it's a real thing. It was struck in 12 AD. And it might have been the one.
This coin in my hand was struck in 12 AD.
That Jesus held up and said, whose head is on the coin in...
Whose head is on this coin? Well, there you go.
And here is a silver shekel, an actual one, 2,000 years old, like the ones that Judas was paid for the betrayal of Jesus. But here we go. This is what struck me the most. 2 tiny little copper mites, like the widow's mites. And you're there, and you just touch them, and they're so tiny you can't really see them. Who bought oil with them, and who hid them, you know, in their little pouch. But you just imagine that old woman amidst all the other, you know, the rich people throwing in the shekels and making big noise. There she was. You know, she just was in the crowd. No one would have noticed her. She pulled it out. She dropped it in. You wouldn't even have noticed. Jesus noticed. And he said, do you see that woman? She gave more than all the others. They gave out of their plenty. She gave everything she had to live with. And I think for me, telling the story like that, and so I expanded that into another monologue, you know, it just helps people to go, oh yeah, we're connected. Like we're connected to each other's stories. We're connected to their stories. And God is doing this great big work. And he's going to bring it to completion one day. And he will help us and he will work in us until that day.
Well, you're clearly inspired, Naomi, and probably a bit inspirational too. I'd love to go through all your books one by one and everything that you're doing right now, including a kids' stage show about Noah's Ark.
Called The Zookeeper, actually.
Called The Zookeeper. But if you jump on Naomi Reed's website, which is naomireed.info, naomireed.info, the address is right there on your screen. You can find out all about it. Thanks so much, Naomi, for coming in.
That's right, lovely. Thank you.
We'll be back straight after the break.